Hi, I'm James Hamilton from Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal, and today we'll build a simple jig for fine-tuning your dados and grooves. A perfect dado is one that slides together easily and remains together by friction alone. But what happens if while you're assembling your project you discover a dado is too tight? You may be able to just bang it together, but once you add glue, those fibers are going to swell and it's simply not going to fit. And it's usually not practical to reinstall a dado set or a router bit and try to make it wider on the machine. In the old days, they would have used something like this, a side rabbet plane, but you probably don't have one of these. So we're going to make this jig to solve the problem. It's fully adjustable for any dado up to 1 inch deep, and it will be built with some scraps of wood and some easy to find hardware. So let's get started. I begin with a piece of 1/2 inch plywood that's about 11 inches wide and 8 to 10 inches deep. We'll trim it to final depth later. For now, I'm drawing 2 lines parallel to the 11-inch edge, first at 1 inch and the second at 2 inches. Then I center my metal plate on the 2-inch line. These plates are used for nailing construction lumber together to create things like trusses. You can buy them in any hardware or home center. Once I center on the workpiece, I place a mark at each corner. Then I use a square to extend those marks from line to line, creating a rectangle. Finally, I strike a line down the center of that rectangle. Where that center line meets the 2 short lines, I bore 1-inch holes. It really pays to use good Forstner bits for a job like this. You want to have a clean cut on both the entrance and the exit sides. Now I have to remove the waste between the 2 holes. A jigsaw like this one is ideal for this. In the other workshop, I have a homemade version that you can build yourself. I'll link to it in the notes below this video. It's a super handy tool for all sorts of different tasks. Take your time and follow your lines carefully. You'll be surprised how accurate a tool like this is. As an alternative, you could use a scroll saw or just bore a series of 1-inch holes down that line through the center of your rectangle and chisel out the waste in between. I've trimmed the rounded edges from a chunk of dry 2x4, squaring it up and cutting it to the same length as my metal plate. I set the block on my panel and I let the plate drop into the slot. Then I use a pencil to mark the location of 2 holes near the top of the block. Be sure you also put marks on the plate so you can remember which 2 holes you reference from. Then use a square to extend 1-inch lines from those 2 points on the block. Now back to the drill press. Here I'm using a 3/8 inch bit to bore a series of overlapping holes along my short lines. Again, a good Forstner bit will make it a lot easier to create overlapping holes cleanly. If you need some good Forstner bits, check out the link in the notes below this video. At the bench, I use a chisel to remove the waste between the holes, creating a pair of slots. For safety's sake, clamp your workpiece down before doing this. I drilled 1/4-inch holes through my plate at the 2 points I marked earlier. I used some 1/4-inch panhead machine screws, washers, and wing nuts to attach the plate to the block. The larger 3/8 inch slots will give you some room for air, so the 1/4-inch screws will slide easily within them. This assembly then sits on top of the panel with the plate lowered into the slot. Make sure it's centered, then clamp it in place. I don't recommend applying glue at this point because you may have to take this back apart to bore holes for the handles later. Flip the jig over and secure it to your bench top. This is one of those awkward clamping situations where a proper woodworking bench with all of its accessories really comes in handy. I countersunk 3 wood screws to hold the block in place. And yes, I twisted that center one off. Oops. I bought 2 large wood knobs from the same place I got everything else. I'm placing them on the panel as close to the block as I can while still leaving room for my fingers so I don't gouge them on the corners of the block while I work. Be sure to countersink those screw heads too. Now to trim the panel to its final width. You want the heels of your hands supported for comfort, so place a mark behind them. Then trim the panel at that point. You could use spray adhesive to apply sandpaper to the plate, but that's messy. I like to use some 80 grit adhesive back sanding discs, trimmed in half of course. I also decided to round off the corners of the base because I like to be fancy. But that's all there is to it. You can set the depth to any dado or groove and widen it by the smallest amounts with just a few strokes. I was going to make plans for this jig, but instead I just decided to give you all the details for free in this video. If you'd like to say thank you though, and help support more jig videos like this, please consider buying one of our deluxe plans over at stumpynubs.com. We really appreciate that. And while you're there, check out the latest issue of Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal. It's always full of great tips, tricks, and tutorials designed to make you a better woodworker. You can read and subscribe for free at stumpynubs.com. Happy widening!